cybersecurity expert Charles Tendell.
Systemic failures that brought their whole systems down.
Charles Tendell, he's a certified ethical hacker.
Your emails, it turns out, are not nearly as private as you think.
Show really how vulnerable we are.
Charles Tendell, who deals with hackers all the time, says,
if you have to ask yourself, is this right? It probably isn't.
Welcome.
17 years at Microsoft, is that what you said?
17 years.
So you've come away from the dark side?
I have. I have. It's a very different view from over here.
It is?
Very different.
Oh my goodness,
Yes.
We're going to have to get more into that. But before, Mark, give a little background. Who are you? What do you do? Introduce yourself to my audience.
So I am Mark Foust. I'm the Chief Evangelist for Oprimal IDM. We're an identity management company, federation broker, single sign-on, virtual directory. And I'm located in New York City, but we're dispersed all around the United States.
Nice, nice. Isn't it really cool watching, coming from Microsoft with an older background, now you can work just about anywhere with some of the new technology that we've got?
It is a bonus, an added bonus.
Nice.
Yes, because you see the landscape from a completely different way at Microsoft.
Really?
Biased, obviously, but at Microsoft, everyone did business with Microsoft. Mm-hmm. Everyone called you back because you were
Microsoft.
Mark Foust from Microsoft, not Mark Foust. You were Mark Foust from Microsoft. Mm-hmm. When you leave a place where everyone does business with you, it is different.
It's a bit of a shock because they're just like, who are you again? What are you doing? What are you trying to get up there? So tell me a little bit more about what you do. Your title is Chief Evangelist at Oprimal IDM. What does Chief Evangelist mean? What does that mean?
So I have my foot into writing documentation, blogs, helping with company messaging, marketing, at the trade show, sales, sometimes from a point of contact, technically, sometimes from a point of contact of opportunity ownership. I cross into many different parts of the company, really just trying to get the message out of who we are and how we differentiate ourselves.
Nice. Now you mentioned coming away from Microsoft. That seems like it's going to be a little bit more work than beforehand. So what does that entail? You making sure the message is out there? Is it just branding? Is it just marketing? Is it introducing new technologies? How does it work?
Well, it's a feedback mechanism from analysts, from customers, and then you go through a weighted system of, okay, we have a particular set of customers that are very interested in going deeper into risk-based authentication, let's just say, and maybe a little AI behind that, and then going through to find out what do analysts say about the future of such a technology, and blockchain's another one that's very high on the hype curve with no concrete deliverables right now. In fact, I'd say that, not to shift the blockchain too much, but they're still vetting out use cases for blockchain and identity. So for all the hype there's not a foundation that's...
Not a whole lot delivered yet.
Yeah. Right now. So I'm the one who takes these ideas, researches them, generates a proposal for my company and the owners to look at and say, do we spend quality time and developmental efforts and resources to go another level, 2, 3, 4 here? And if we do, what's the risk of ignoring X, Y, and Z that aren't as high up on the hype curve, but our customer needs?
It makes sense. It makes sense. That's actually a really cool position to be in. So you get exposed to like every new technology.
I do.
And you have to go and figure out, is this something we should be worthwhile to?
Yes.
Nice. So in the terms of blockchain, and I don't know, did you catch the keynotes yesterday about?
I did not.
About it?
No.
Well, there's a lot of consensus at the higher levels that's exactly the problem. There's a lot of hype around blockchain, but there's not been a lot delivered. Nobody's really figured out what to do with it. There's a lot of hypothesis, a lot of people saying we might be able to do with this. What's your feeling on it? How do you personally feel about where it's going to go?
Well, so the major vendors, I'll take Microsoft because I'm very familiar with almost 17 years there. Microsoft has thrown in support for blockchain. Their support and their announcements are based off of partnerships and wanting to be, because any blockchain type of environment, it's going to be very CPU intensive and very storage intensive to hold all the transactions, which can never be deleted and always appended. So it's going to take an enormous amount of storage space and an enormous amount of CPU cycles. Well, Azure is perfect, as is AWS. Any type of those vendors, those web service vendors, are going to love that. They don't have to own, like Microsoft has to own Active Directory and the identity, and they want to be the, identity party for.
They want to hold all the keys.
They can't in blockchain. You're going to be a peer. You have to share the technology. You can't have a closed API. So the way that Microsoft can monetize this, it's much easier for them than for a vendor like us. We're not trying to resell Azure space to churn CPU cycles. We're the ones that have to come up with the ideas and the use cases.
Okay.
And then we have to realize that, okay, if we do this, step 1, 2, and 3, can we monetize that? What if the standards don't support my first idea, which I think is a really great idea?
Well, I mean, so do we stop doing it because we can't monetize it? I mean, the general idea of a peer-to-peer kind of authentication system or a tracking system or no one being the custodian of these types of forms of authentication means everyone is adding their 2 cents to whether Mark is a valid entity to be dealing with or something like that. Monetizing that wasn't really put into the original idea of how a decentralized kind of system is supposed to work. Is monetizing it going to be a milestone or a hurdle that's going to prevent any type of innovation?
It's an assessment whether and how much resources that we pin to a technology that we're not sure is going to come out.
Right.
So the way to make money in Bitcoin, blockchain and Bitcoin, is to mine it, and is to
Or to trade it, invest it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
a whole
if you're
bunch
not
of different ways. Yeah.
But for identity, it's completely different. Let's just say I have an identity. I'm a resident of the state of Florida. I happen to live in New York right now, but resident of the state of Florida. If I want to vote in the state of Florida, they need 5 pieces of information about me. So to me, this is a great use case for blockchain. They need 5 pieces of information. However, Florida state law says that those 5 pieces of information cannot coexist in the same database.
Okay.
And there's a debate whether it can even be cached all at the same time, but we'll take that out of it. So today...
Well, I can see why the debate of caching it would be a problem, because if it is cached, even if it's not supposed to be in the same database at the same time, it's in the same cache at the same time, so while not a database, it's on the same system all at the same time. There's no really way to get around that, is there?
But how do you automate without that? So how do you automate? And how do you protect? So they don't, and I'm making a sweeping statement, I do understand how it works in the state of Florida, but I'm generalizing. So you have a big room with people with 5 monitors. Each monitor projects one of those 5 pieces of information. Do you have have you committed a federal crime? Let me look at your DMV record and these other pieces of information, and they're check or no check. And I'm now a valid voter in the state of Florida. Well, what blockchain could do there is take, so let me go back up a level, and instead of saying blockchain as a public identity, as more of a closed system within the citizens of the state of Florida. So all the peers would be in the state of Florida, all the peers would be agencies within the state of Florida, and each would validate that, okay, this
piece
user,
of information is real.
he has a valid driver's license, boom. Yes, he has a higher education degree or whatever. Yes, he doesn't have a record that would nullify his ability to vote in the state of Florida. And then I can present that, almost like a token, I can present that to the voting system, be a valid voter. Yes, validate me. And that record, of course, goes with me. Each piece of the chain has validated only the part that they're supposed to know. So my information's never been cached and exposed. It's just a simple yes or no.
Yeah, it's the way, do you remember when Touch ID and Face ID first came out for Apple, and everybody, depending on which side of the security spectrum you were on, they were like, you're sending your picture, your voice, and now all these things to it. And Apple's solution was, no, all we're sending is basically the checksum of that information calculated from your device. So that's what's verifying you, that's what's telling our system that this is you from your device. It's the same kind of principle. We're removing the human beings from carrying the burden of saying, saying, yes, this is Mark, yes, he is valid to vote, yes, he can do the things that he wants to do. We've gone through all of that. But just like in the human world, that system is susceptible to a compromise. It's susceptible to someone getting in that chain somewhere and messing it up. How does technology like blockchain or any other type of identity management get around that?
Well, there are pieces that you can get around, the pieces that you can. The pieces that you're not supposed to be able to get around is any block in the chain that's up here, if there's any fraudulent activity, is cut off. And so that should work
Be the end of it
perfectly. And
so, but again, that's a if a block in a chain, if a particular block in the chain is incorrect, if it isn't validated, right? If it stops the chain right there, and the reason that it ended up being invalidated was just somebody fat-fingered a code or something like that, is it reasonable to stop the entire train, the entire movement of whatever this is, for a glitch, for a typo?
Not the entire train. There
Just
would
that
need to be
portion.
some type of reassertion.
Okay. Remedial verification
Yes.
or something like that. Nice. So tell me a little bit more about what Optimal IDM does. It sounds like you guys are deep in the identity management space, and this is your bread and butter, just validating people are who they say they are. What do you do?
So Optimal IDM was founded by 3 particular genius developers who worked for a number of companies that got acquired. And so they landed up at a very big vendor, which everyone knows the name of, and not the one I came from, but another giant one. And they saw how the great technology that they were using and had implemented as both developers and consultants went to the wayside after an acquisition. And they saw virtual directories in their world become meta directories, which is not really their vision, right? It's a separate thing. They saw a need, they saw customer pain from being consultants, and as developers, they were cocky enough to think, we can do this better. We can do this right, we can do this better, and we can do this without a giant database needed to synchronize and pull information all back and forth across the network. And this was really before Federation was any big deal at all. So they started out with a vision saying, let's build a virtual directory from the ground up without storing any information. So let's connect we have customers with 300 or more Active Directory forests that look as one to the virtual directory. So on-premise, now I have a single management pane, a single proxy piece of middleware that I authenticate to, and it'll find me in whichever forest that I'm supposed to be in. It will virtualize the schema, so 300 forests, if I buy a third-party product like Cisco WebEx, and I need to extend the schema 300 times so that everyone can participate.
That sounds crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
So what we can do is we can virtualize the schema extensions. It only happens within our software.
So let me make sure let me unpack this a little bit, make sure I understand what you got. So your software is basically that pivot point. It's assumed that anything coming from this one has the authorization or has been validated to go through this, and we're just going to do whatever your software tells me to do to be able to make it so for everyone that it represents, basically.
So we are going to be the proxy point that will make the initial what we're going to do is we're going to take the connection and sever it.
Right.
Then we're going to, from us, go back to the back-end directory system, which could be a SQL server, it could be Active Directory, it could be any
You're an
LDAP.
authenticated service bus, basically.
Yes, and then is it a valid user? Does it have a valid hash? Yes, and then what we do is we provide the yes at that point, and then allow the user and the back-end system then to connect and make the handshake. So we are not going to make the final authentication decision. Your own directory systems will make that.
It makes sense.
Yes.
It makes sense.
So now you can't do a denial of service against Active Directory when we're the proxy point because you're doing up against.
It makes sense. And the Active Directory doesn't have to worry about whether it's getting a malicious inquiry because it's basically being introduced by its friend Mark.
Right. And an Active Directory by default will allow you to view everything in the LDAP.
Nice.
Right? That's the properties of LDAP that you're able to view. We will granularly say, well, you can only see this forest, this particular OU, and what you need.
Now, I could see how that would become pretty cumbersome for people. Like, it seems like in a normal Active Directory environment or in a normal user permission environment, how heavy that's going to get. But you said it's one platform, one dashboard that they can go in, and it applies either globally or to unique users individually as the admin.
Absolutely, either way. Yeah, and we can extend Active Directory in new ways with the virtual schema. We can transform the LDAP requests to provide a workflow. When you disable a user in, let's just say one of the 300 backend AD forests, I'm just picking on AD here, we can immediately disable them at the proxy layer, which means they'll never have the access to go back end and authenticate on the back end. So you've got immediate hire fire scenarios, onboarding and offboarding, immediate.
One click, so.
Yes, and there's no synchronization of information going back and forth.
And you don't have to run around to each department and be like, we just let go of the senior IT guy who had the keys to all the
And you don't need trust between Active Directory forests either.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, now doesn't that scare you a little bit? I mean, at this point, you're now the trusted best friend, the holder of all of the keys, the access to everything. How are you protecting that? How are you keeping that your software or your particular entity that has this relationship with Active Directory and essentially owns every piece of the organization at this point? How do you protect that?
But we don't actually own all the pieces of information, and we don't need necessarily elevated access as a service account to do all this.
Okay.
Which is very unique and interesting. So we can create a connection to each Active Directory as a service account with, depending upon what you want to do. There are certain pieces of workflow where we need to have elevated privileges if you want to do it, but by default, we don't need all that. We need to be able to read, our service account needs to read the users of where they're at in the directory, read that particular forest, and
be able to create, I would assume you'd be able to create user records as well, right? Create, delete, disable, things of that nature.
That's up to a customer, whether they want to do that.
So that was the next one. So now it is controllable, it is definable by the customer itself, right? And we're making the assumption that rogue IT guy isn't going to be a scenario where someone's going to get access to this tool.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I would love to see how it's implemented. I mean, coming from Microsoft, I know seeing the forest through the trees is going to be something that you guys are definitely good at. But what was the end solution? Like, what was the problem that you were most trying to solve as they came up with this idea?
Well, it had a lot to do with customer feedback, especially in the very early incubation stages of the virtual directory from the three owners. They were writing exactly what customers had engaged them to write. As they moved forward, they immediately saw, as Office 365 was coming into BPOS and Office 365, that Microsoft at the time could not support multiple forests. It's a single forest, which meant if you wanted to be in Office 365 using it, you were going to spend
a lot of time,
boatload, and potentially years and years and years of man years of consulting, having a bunch of consultants come sit on-prem and get you down into a single forest, and all the work that takes to do that, where we took none of that. We would connect, and at the because we're an LDAP proxy, and we support federation, multi-factor authentication. Just that virtual directory is the underpinning, the foundation of the federation components, the multi-factor authentication components, and everything else. We could connect to hundreds of forests, make them look like one, and then channel that directly into Office 365, so you didn't need to do the back-end work.
Seems like a pretty cool streamlined process. I'm going to have to get a little more in depth on it, find out about it. Well, Mark, we're going to run out of time. How can people find out more about Optimal IDM?
Optimal IDM.
Website and all that other stuff? You're out here at RSA?
We were doing, we have a booth at RSA here. N44 in the 4400s, North 4400s.
Nice.
And
4400 block of RSA.
Yeah, go to optimalidm.com. We've got some great documentation there. In fact, I just finished a document on 101 uses of a virtual directory. Of course, that virtual directory is just one part and parcel of what we do. Our federation broker, single sign-on broker, is highly rated by analysts in the industry, as is our MFA solutions.
Nice, nice. So you've been around RSA. Is this your first one?
This is my first RSA, yes.
Nice. So what have you seen? What are you excited about? And what do you hope to see by the end of the week?
I love how big it is, I love that there's a focus on security with identity being in there, because identity is truly the firewall, really. I mean, really, it's the firewall. It is the boundary. I love to see those two things coexist together, and I love, for someone who's spent almost 17 years at Microsoft, not to be in an event that's purely Microsoft driven. Although I had a wonderful time there, nothing bad to say. Just interested to see what it's like on a different side of the fence.
Very nice, very nice. Well, Mark, it has been a pleasure talking to you, sir, and I look forward to catching up with you guys here at RSA.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And now I have to go and hit stop.